Like a dream come true.
In my 70s Fantastic Four video, I said when Marvel runs out of ideas, they have the Thing turn back to normal again. In Iron Man, when they run out of story ideas, they have him fight Namor. So that's the first issue of the 70s, showing Tony Stark finding out about a chemical spill in the ocean at one of his factories, leading to a showdown with Subby himself, who blames the surface for polluting the water. Even after seeing the receipts from Iron Man's fight, these cigar-puffing Stark Industries investors still deny that pollution is a problem. Tony is still a rich guy in a flying tank. However, this decade is about him fighting pollution and corporate greed, listening to protesters, trying to help communities bring wealth into their neighborhoods, building orphanages, and other charity work. He's clearly fictional because he's the rich guy trying to listen to people around him and become a better person to make up for his past mistakes. Compared to the 80s, the stories are simpler, but he's starting to get more developed. Iron Man co-creator Don Heck returns to the book with issue 26 and stays until issue 37. His art is more fluid this go-around, and he's inked by people like Johnny Craig, Chick Stone, and Mike Esposito over the course of his run. From there, Heck is replaced by George Tuska, who returns to the book and stays until issue 106 with some gaps in between. For the most part, Tuska really is the main Iron Man artist during this decade. He's the part keeping these stories consistent. While the writers and editors change often, Tuska was there hitting deadlines. Archie Goodwin leaves the book as a regular writer with issue 28. He still occasionally edits the book and comes back for fill-ins throughout the decade. Some of the other writers during this period include Mimi Gold, the first woman to write Iron Man with issue 29. Although Marie Severin was the first woman to draw a lot of Marvel's characters, including Shellhead. Jerry Conway became the regular writer in 1970 with issue 35 and stayed until issue 43. He does come back for another quick run in the mid-70s. Overall, for me, his run is all over the place, and the strongest stuff is near the very end. Gary Friedrich wrote 2 issues. There's another Friedrich named Mike who had the longest run of the 2. Mike's 30-ish issue run covers politics and protests. It's a more socially conscious Iron Man run, at least for mainstream comics. We get a quick stroll with Len Wein, then Bill Mantlo takes over with issue 86, staying until 115. Mantlo's run is sci-fi heavy and takes characters and concepts from the 60s, bringing them into the 70s. Jack Kirby's influence is felt strongly in this run. Near the end of the decade, we get the Dream Team. There's also one fill-in issue written by Robert Kanigher with dialogue that should be counted as a hate crime against readers.
You've licked your chops at everything I've served you. Now, gulp down these sizzling pizzas from Pompeii. Swallow this red-hot double scoop from hell. None of these
Even though Tony is trying to do good, this era doesn't let him get away scot-free with his role in Vietnam. Issues like 78 take time to confront Tony's past as a weapons maker. Having seen what happened in Vietnam firsthand, he takes it upon himself to confront the people who were like him at that time. It's why later stories like Armor Wars from the 80s are so important to his character. Iron Man doesn't move as fast as books like Spider-Man, Thor, or Fantastic Four. By issue 50, Tony is still plugging himself into the wall to charge. Tony was supposed to have fixed his heart problems back in issue 19, but he still has heart attacks during this decade. The stakes just aren't very high until later. There are a lot of forgettable villains with random gimmicks and no staying power. Demetrius, Soul Father, Monster Master, Night Phantom, even Tony's love interest, Marianne Rogers, gets psychic powers. There is one villain who sticks out. Introduced in Iron Man 27 from 1970 as the most controversial villain in comics. Mainstream 70s Marvel comics, at least. Created by Goodwin and Heck, we have what looks like the perfect villain to go up against Iron Man. So, the story centers around a protest in Eddie March's hometown in the Midwest. The protest is about a community center funded by Stark's charity opening up in Eddie's old neighborhood. Tony isn't in charge of building the community center, he just founded it and decided Eddie should be the director. This councilman named Bradshaw is in charge of it, and he's the reason the people in this neighborhood are protesting. Firebrand also shows up and tries to win over the protesters because he sees the community center as a symbol of
the man.
These are black-led peaceful protests in a black neighborhood where the community center is opening up. Firebrand opts for a more aggressive approach. Goodwin didn't just make this up. To his credit, he was paying attention to what was going on around him. Protests like this have always been common in the US. While Firebrand's identity is a mystery in his first appearance, a later story reveals he's from Detroit, Michigan. Michigan itself has a long history of black-led protests that were met with police violence. Firebrand baits Iron Man into a fight. It becomes clear he just wanted to escalate for his own personal vendetta. Keep in mind, black-led peaceful protest in a black neighborhood. Firebrand also fully covers his face and no one knows who he is. The police feel more justified to use violence when the fight starts. Firebrand doesn't have to deal with police violence. The people on the ground get attacked in his place. These people were protesting because they wanted control of their neighborhood back. They want control of their own community so they can build up their own businesses and resources.
They'll let you participate, but not control. Participation keeps you busy. Ownership makes you powerful.
They always say we're doing everything. We don't read it every time the white people come down the block. We don't push them out their neighborhood and throw rocks and start hitting them. We don't bother the white people around our neighborhood, but when we get in a white neighborhood, they just push us out.
After the protesters convince Eddie that the community center is detrimental to the neighborhood, they go confront Bradshaw in his office. Tony sponsored the community center in good faith, thinking it would help the neighborhood. He wasn't aware that Bradshaw was using it to line his pockets. Firebrand escapes, leaving others to clean up his mess. Firebrand returns throughout the 70s and becomes more and more psychologically unhinged with each appearance. I'll gray out this part in the video so people can skip over it since it goes into spoiler territory. Some people describe Firebrand as anti-establishment, but then he just becomes someone who uses his revolution as an excuse to burn everything down. On the surface, Firebrand is anti-corporate. He says he wants to fight the system, but he becomes hypocritical in his first issue. No one knows that under the mask, Firebrand is a white guy named Gary. We find out his real identity in issue 48. Also that Gary is the son of Simon Gilbert, who is one of the directors of Stark's company. Friedrich and Tusker reveal how Gary had an abusive upbringing, which influenced but does not excuse his violent nature. Simon's subplot is trying to take over Stark Industries and push Tony out. Gary doesn't want to overthrow powerful figures. He wants to replace them to feel control over his life. There's even a story near the end of Friedrich's run where Firebrand plans to take over an alternate dimension. Simon ends up dying in an explosion while Iron Man and Firebrand fight. So even though Gary doesn't care about his father, he uses Simon's death to keep up his vendetta against Iron Man. To the credit of the writers and artists, Firebrand is not glamorized. This is just my take. I don't know what Goodwin was planning since he left the book. Mike Friedrich writes the rest of Firebrand's appearances in the 70s. It seems apparent early on that Gary's activism is performative, and he uses pretending to care as an excuse to justify his anger and how he takes his insecurities out on others or blames others for his problems. He doesn't care about marginalized people either and is physically abusive towards his own sister. A common criticism from people who don't read Iron Man's comics, or people who just read Civil War, is that he's a government stooge. Throughout his stories, even in the 70s, he's shown to be pretty critical of the government. There's another mystical villain in the 70s named Black Llama, but that villain is more of a plot device to bring everyone together to fight Iron Man. Despite his conflicts with Firebrand, Iron Man still goes to another dimension to save him after he's kidnapped by Black Llama. One of Tony's best and worst traits is giving people second chances even when he shouldn't. Tony still feels that he didn't always live the most responsible life himself. In 1972, Iron Man 55 materialized out of nowhere and put the series in a chokehold. It's such a random story that serves as the build-up for everything. So much of what we know about modern Marvel is built on the shoulders of Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and Iron Man 55. There's so much meat in this story, including the first appearance of people's favorite purple space nihilist. Starlin himself is a massive Kirby and Ditko fan, and their influence seasons a lot of his work. Quote, "I think for me, it was Kirby. Probably the monster books at that time. But I didn't recognize who Jack Kirby was until I went to a junk shop and picked up some old comics, and among them was The Fighting American, which had Simon and Kirby's name on it." Unquote. Thanos is often described as Marvel's dark side. However, the original inspiration for the Mad Titan was Metron from Kirby's Fourth World. After Iron Man, Starlin would work on less popular titles of the era like Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock. Quote, "I was always ahead of my deadlines. You know, Warlock was not a book that was a big brand. It wasn't a Spider-Man, it wasn't an X-Men. It was this strange book that was selling pretty well for what it was, so they left me alone. At that point, they were getting a new editor of the week. They went from Roy Thomas to Jerry Conway for 2 weeks, then Len Wein and Marv Wolfman. Archie Goodwin did it for a week and a half, and then Jim Shooter. I had enough stuff going on in there where there was just no time for them to jump in." Unquote. He used these less popular characters to elevate the stories with cosmic epics that explore themes of death and existentialism while criticizing organized religion, with Thanos himself becoming more nihilistic with each appearance. According to Mike Friedrich, quote, "As the printed credits in that issue clearly state, these characters and the story that introduced them were developed solely by Jim Starlin. I don't remember if Jim showed me his character ideas and I took them to editor Roy Thomas, or if Jim presented them first to Roy, who in turn suggested Iron Man as the place to launch them." Unquote. At some point, Iron Man gets the infamous nose mask. In the comic, it's described as a cosmetic choice to make him more expressive. Eventually, they go back to the classic look. In Tuska's words, quote, "I always liked the Tony Stark Iron Man dilemma. This invincible armored guy protecting a damaged heart. I wasn't crazy about the face, the emotionless expression of the helmet." Unquote. This era often feels like 1 step forward, 10 steps back. The Mandarin this decade is as cliched as he's ever been. Unfortunately, for a while, Mandarin's designs looked like cheap Halloween costumes. They even gave him a redesign that's worse than the original. Mandarin appears a lot in the 70s, but Marvel decides to bring back another villain named the Yellow Claw, who is just as unsubtle as you'd think. He predates Mandarin and debuted in the 50s during the Atlas Comics days. Villains like Mandarin and Yellow Claw aren't a critique of Yellow Peril themes. At best, they're boring stories. At worst, they perpetuate stereotypes that should have been outdated by then anyway. Sunfire also shows up, but even he's not depicted well in the 70s anyway. You would think a hot-headed superhero with fire powers would be easy to do. They've already done it twice. Only difference is this guy is Japanese. Then again, superhero fans care more about fictional minorities like mutants and X-Men than they do minorities in real life. Although, if you do want to read superhero comics about people from different backgrounds written with tact, just go read everything Milestone put out. Even if Dwayne McDuffie writes a bad comic, it's still going to be a pretty good one. Around the issue 103 to 107 range, Bill Mantlo brings back Midas, a Silver Age Iron Man villain who comes back to take over Tony's company. We also get to meet one of his mentors, an engineer named Abe Klein. He's a Holocaust survivor who lost his family during World War II. This plays into his disgust with Midas and other Iron Man villains like the Controller, who use others for personal gain. The Midas takeover isn't a real crossover, but all of Tony's supporting characters come back to help him overthrow the big bad. As someone who prefers working alone, this is one of those moments when Tony realizes that others have his back. During this arc, longtime Iron Man penciler George Tuska departs as the regular artist. He's replaced by Keith Pollard for a few issues, starting with issue 107. Pollard's inclusion in this book re-energizes it because he leans into more psychedelic cosmic imagery instead of just boardrooms and cityscapes. In the early 70s range of issues, Pollard had a brief stint as Iron Man's artist, sometimes co-penciling with Arvell Jones. After Midas, Tony rebuilds his company, which paves the way for a new Iron Man era. Pollard stays until issue 113 when John Romita Jr. jumps on the book, making it one of his earliest Marvel jobs. While he started as a cover artist, Romita didn't become the regular penciler for Shellhead's series until issue 115. When he was in his early 20s, his first published Marvel work appeared in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 11 from 1977. Romita said, quote, "The first full issue I ever did was Iron Man 115, unquote. Romita is still doing a cleaner house style at this point, but even then, hints of that blocky look are there, especially in his faces. I don't know what his exact process is, so I can't speak on that." While Bob Layton's first Iron Man job was inking Tuska's pencils in issue 91, he becomes a series regular in issue 116.
I couldn't afford to go to college because I was relatively poor. And I just really decided I was going to teach myself and get into comics. So I started publishing my own little amateur comics. And I started sending them to the comic book companies. And finally somebody happened to notice it after I got to a point where I developed enough that it looked even tolerable. And one of the guys called me and asked me if I'd be interested in working as his apprentice. So I packed up everything I had. I had $200 in my pocket, and I drove to Connecticut, where the guy lived. I wound up, sending samples up, and got work. I've been working there ever since. It's like a dream come true.
There are some stories that vaguely hint at Tony's alcoholism, but it's nothing too crazy until Demon in a Bottle. Layton and Romita make Iron Man really expressive behind the mask. They don't rely on gimmicks like a nose. His eyes and body language say everything you need to know. A lot of this decade is extremely convoluted, like how the different creative teams try to add melodrama to Iron Man's stories, but they go about it in an extremely clunky way. This Layton era moves fast. Instead of Tony complaining about heart problems and being stuck in a suit, he leans into his playboy lifestyle. Tony fights Namor, again, beats the Hulk, he loses to alcoholism but gets his life back together. Also, Scott Lang shows up for a bit. This run also introduces the badass Beth Cabe, Secretary Mrs. Arbogast, and Tony's pilot/friend, James Rhodes. More than previous runs, this team tried to make technology we take for granted today happen in the 70s and 80s. Issue 27, Firebrand's first appearance. He's presented as someone who's fed up with corporate greed and the direction of the US. Peaceful protester turned violent after deciding peace won't actually help. He claims to support the protesters who stand with him. It turns out he wants to escalate the situation so he can have an excuse to burn everything down. His identity doesn't get revealed until a later issue. For me, if there's one issue to read this decade, it would be this one. Issue 37. When Tony's heart is giving out, he reveals his identity to one of his engineers, Kevin O'Brien, in an act of desperation. Tony later ends up giving Kevin his own armor, and he takes up the moniker of Guardsman. The O'Brien family is a pretty under-discussed part of Iron Man's supporting cast. Just like War Machine, Kevin has his own thing going on, so he's not really a sidekick. Issue 39. While the story itself is pretty underwhelming, this issue features Herb Trimpe as the guest artist. Not only did he pencil the book, he inked it too. Full-on deadline mode. While the legend says Trimpe drew the book in 24 hours, apparently he said he did it in a couple days instead, which is still pretty impressive. This guy makes things harder for himself by having the Avengers show up for a couple pages. I love this issue because it's a reminder that the comics industry is still a deadline-heavy one. They gotta get those books out the door. Issue 48. Firebrand returns, and he's angrier than ever. There's a lot of family drama in this one. Issue 55. Jim Starlin casually shows up and adds some psychedelic seasoning to the title. This issue feels like it falls in the middle of an arc, but it can be read as a one-shot and introduces a lot of new characters like Thanos, Drax, and the Blood Brothers. We also get to see Titan and Thanos' family like Mentor and Eros. The difference between issues 54 to 55 is night and day. Starlin had a knack for showing up on less popular titles and giving them the jumpstart they needed. He did make his Iron Man debut in issue 53, doing some additional pencils alongside George Tuska with inks by Vinnie Coletta. Issue 56. The immediate follow-up to the Mad Titans debut is Jim Starlin teaming up with writer Steve Gerber. It's kind of a shitpost of a comic. Both of them have non-conformist approaches to superhero comics. Also, Starlin is the guy who turned Marvel editorial into clowns in an issue of Adam Warlock. This issue is like an Atlas monster comic invading the 70s, and Iron Man just happens to be a part of it. Issue 73. While the story itself isn't game-changing, I'm throwing this in here for the sweet Arvell Jones and Keith Pollard art. However, the Crimson Dynamo comes back and Iron Man has to choose between stopping a villain or saving people, with a reminder that he can't save everyone. I didn't cover it in my milestone video, but Jones's work on Cobalt is worth checking out. Issue 94, part of a two-parter where Tony is kidnapped by a pirate who wants to blackmail him into building weapons for his crew. Mostly adding it here because it's plotted and drawn by Herb Trimpe. It's almost like a bootleg comic where Trimpe decided that Iron Man should fight pirates. Issue 102, Dread Knight's first appearance. We get a sleek cover by George Perez with inks by Pablo Marcos. This issue brings back some Silver Age flavor. A villain named the Dread Knight, created by Dr. Doom, finds the armor and flying horse of an older Marvel villain named the Black Knight. Issue 112. I always have to throw in some Keith Pollard art in there. Jack of Hearts plays a big role in this story. A lot of people who wrote letters said they wanted to see more of him. This issue, written by Bill Mantlo, opens up with a modern knight on a mechanical horse with a glowing sword leading an army in space. We also see where the original Jack Kirby Punisher went after the Galactus trilogy. This issue is so clearly channeling the King's energy, and it's just delightful. The thing that makes Tony Stark a hero to me is not that he's a rich guy. That's not relatable. It's that, unlike a lot of people, he calls himself out. He calls himself out on his privilege and biases and role in the military-industrial complex. Tony's whole role is about confronting himself and getting better. This awkward period of the 70s, even though a lot of the stories are really bad or dull, is Tony trying to step away from being the symbol of imperialism that he was created to be in his first appearance in the 60s. It took until the mid to late 70s to get there, but Tony caught up to everyone and eventually learned who he was supposed to be. All of my stuff is on my website. If it's not on there, it's not me. Chaos ensues. As an Iranian American and part of the diaspora, I can't sit around and make comics videos without discussing the revolution going on in Iran currently. I'm very much privileged to be here while people actually living in Iran of all ages are fighting for their freedom and have been every day since 1979. What is going on in Iran and has been going on is not a great issue. Iranians rising up against the regime is the result of people fighting for the basic human rights that have been denied to them since 1979. Over 36,000 people were massacred by military weapons between January 8th to 9th, 2026, with more dying every day. At this point, the currency has completely crashed. In the last video I made, I talked about some of the Iranians who were imprisoned by or lost their lives to the regime during the Masa Amini protests in 2022. This won't be everyone, but I'll mention some Iranians impacted by the protests going on now. Ali Haydari, Shervin Baqerian, Negin Qarimi, Taha Hoshiar, Sahar Fala, Rohan Barjeste, Ziba Dastjerdi, Reza Azimzadeh, Erfan Amiri. When I say Iran, I refer to the people, not the Islamic Republic that subjugates and kills Iranians. That is not Iran. The regime is not representative of Iranians and the diaspora. A lot of people use Iran interchangeably, and that is incorrect. The regime is a tumor that needs to be cut out. It is everything Iran is not. Iran with its many different ethnicities and languages and vast history. The Islamic Republic is not Iran. They are not truly Iranian. They are demons in human skin suits who corrupt the meaning of what it is to be Iranian and a human being. That is why this revolution is important. Iranians are some of the warmest, most hospitable people on the planet. Average Iranians want the regime gone. Also, this is the pro-regime bloody pitchfork flag. This is the true flag of Iran, which people can still be arrested or executed for showing in public. Iranians need to take their home back for themselves. There has been deafening silence from the West, especially from those who claim to be progressive and support protests against authoritarianism. While right-wingers cannot be depended on to act like human beings, white Western leftists and progressives aren't much better, repeatedly revealing themselves to be hypocrites and performative activists, caring more about looking good to themselves than about actual human rights. In the US, it's been clear that one group gets more attention than other ones. For white Americans, things just started getting bad with the ICE executions of 2 white people on camera. Why? What happened to you All Lives Matter people? I thought all lives mattered to you, not just the white ones. Now you're seeing celebrities suddenly speaking up, screeching, "They're coming for us." When they say us, they still mean white people. It's never been about people from minority groups or other countries. All these dead and detained black and brown people and people from other non-European backgrounds. When I say white, I mean the made-up concept created by Europeans to establish a hierarchy that benefits them. I'm not referring to skin tone or passing, even though colorism is 100% an issue. Also, not talking about checking the white box but still being marginalized. White refers to Eurocentric because that's what they register. People from different groups and other countries have been speaking up against authoritarianism this whole time. The month that this video is coming out in is Black History Month in the US. That's all that is, a history of people speaking up. European Americans can't pretend this is suddenly new because 2 white people got shot. For those of non-European descent, what's happening in the US isn't something that suddenly happened or that can be turned off. Also, whether it's people in Iran or the diaspora, we've been speaking up this whole time. I've been speaking up about events in Iran my whole life. White people won't listen to points others make unless it's from one of their own mouths. Listening to others would mean humanizing those outside of their demographic. Part of their white supremacist structure that every single one of them inhabits is seeing those outside of their group as beneath them. These people thought their privilege made them exempt. They genuinely believed that detainment and bullets were reserved for non-Europeans. For them, the darker the skin tone, the more this applies. All of the true progress being made in the West is done by people from marginalized groups and other cultures. The reason anything even exists here is because it was built on the backs of indigenous and black people and the backs of other non-colonizing cultures. There are all these different causes that aim to raise awareness, and I know I'll miss a lot. Black Lives Matter, they ignored that. Stop Asian Hate, they ignored that. The Masa Amini protests, some of them pretended to care about that. The current Free Iran protests, they're ignoring that as well. Let's not pretend white America cares about Palestine and Ukraine either. And them just starting to care now shows you just how unserious everything is in the US. Minorities are still getting kidnapped, by the way. People who are here legally and have been for a while. People who are just trying to live their lives. Neighbors, business owners, they're just Americans. Forget this white paranoia that minorities are trying to replace them. All people want to do is live in peace and be left alone. But European Americans have made it clear that no lives matter but their own. When they interact with minorities, it's usually for personal gain, not because they have a stake in a cause. White people are out here obsessing over everybody, black, Asian, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, just getting in everybody's business. They initiate an interaction or attack, minorities respond, that's usually what it is, responding to these people getting in your space. Then white people twist themselves into the main characters or pretend they're victims. People are trying to mind their business. Whenever white leftists or progressives speak up, it's the McDonald's centrist neutered version of activism. They're not saying or risking anything, just performing for people from their demographic. They might as well say bad things bad. Yes, we know, Nazis and fascism are bad. It's common sense, like looking both ways before crossing the street. But what are they going to do about their biases when they're still part of the problem? Like, even if the ICE situation ends, when there's no reason for them to perform anymore, things will go right back to how they were. They love throwing out those all lives matter feel-good civil rights era quotes, ignoring the ones that are critical and push for change.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
How do you go about not alienating the white man who has been for you
We don't
through
care.
violence?
We don't care. For 400 years, they have murdered, burned, raped, castrated, and tortured. I give less than a hootenanny what any white person thinks about this black man is.
Well, but don't you want us to be with you?
I don't want you to do anything but leave us alone.
Oh.
We don't need you.
But I mean moral support. I don't mean do anything for you, but
work in your own neighborhood with the white people. They need the morality. We don't.
Stood up for the Negro, and now they say, well, now when they resort to violence, we are not with them.
Violence?
Well, I mean in some of these riot areas.
Well, riot areas. You talk about we resort to violence when I talked to a reporter for Newsweek, a total of National Guardsmen shooting down people in the back. Understand? As they're walking down the street minding their business, shooting in caliber machine guns.
Yes,
now wait a minute, listen. You said about violence. Yeah, I get sick in my stomach when I hear a white person talk about violence. You're the most violent people in the world. You are born on it, you live on it, you're sick with it. You're saturated with it. We have been the most peaceable, law-abiding fools the world has ever seen.
The dark skin, the fact that Negroes are in the ghetto or the Negroes are oppressed is not so terrifying as is the fact the white Americans who do this every day don't want to know they're doing it. Segregation means that you can penalize a man for being born black, and then you can pretend you did not do it.
Taking their position in reverse?
Don't say the whites down south. Whites up north. There's no difference between whites in the south and whites in the north, only the whites in the south aren't hypocritical about it. You don't find any more there is just as much social intermixing in the south as between the races as there is in the north. Only in the south they let you know where they stand, and in the north they take a hypocritical approach or attitude or reaction.
White and progressive don't belong in the same sentence. They prefer stasis at best or regression. The only people progressing anything in the West, especially in the US, are outside of the Eurocentric bubble. Without people from other cultures, these Puritans would still be lighting their own women on fire and calling them witches for being on their period. With the revolution in Iran, I'm not really concerned with alienating white people because they've never supported Iranians anyway, right, left, or centrists. Not in my lifetime, not even since 1979. The ones who claim to are doing it to make themselves look good to people in their demographic, but they still care more about their false sense of superiority than basic human rights and overthrowing a dictatorship. It's not really a demographic I'm trying to appeal to. Iranians don't need Western masturbatory performative activism, they need follow-through. Like I said in my last video, not an anti-protest spiel, just an anti-performative one. Also, another personal opinion. These fake activists will capitalize on these protests and people's pain by making t-shirts or merch to sell in the name of their hollow activism. They are scum doing it for personal gain and profit. Also, these tech companies have been selling our information for a while, but now they're specifically handing over information of anyone who criticizes ICE. They just want it to be easier to disappear marginalized people. Outlets like New York Times are putting up articles of how the regime, quote, crushed uprisings, and that's not the case. Iranians are still pushing back. It's irresponsible reporting on the part of these outlets. This is not about these fake activists. This is about the people of Iran. I can't sit here and talk about fiction knowing that almost 40,000 people were wiped out by military weapons in just 2 days in January. For any Iranians watching, know that the diaspora supports you and has always been supporting you. When you gain your freedom and overthrow the regime, know that it's the victory you earned and you deserve. So I'm going to be paying attention to Iran. I wanted to wrap this up by listing the names of some people executed by ICE who don't get much coverage. The ones who didn't get their names directly mentioned in Springsteen songs. Just because their executions weren't caught on camera doesn't mean they didn't happen. Like with Iranians who lost their lives, remembering these people's names is the least we can do. Harity Law, Keith Porter Jr., Victor Manuel Diaz, Luis Gustavo Núñez Cáceres. برای آدمای ایران هممون پشتتون هستیم. هر روز ازتون فکر میکنیم. این جنگ شما هست ولی یک روز آزاد میشین. شیر هستین، خورشید پشتتون هست. شجاعترین آدمای دنیا هستین.
Hello, Iranian here. They keep asking the same question. Why are lefties, why are the loudest pro-Gaza voices completely silent when it comes to Iran? Well, the answer is simple, because the truth exposes the lie. Because acknowledging Iran would shatter the ideological fantasy that they built. Let's be clear. Islamic Republic of Iran is not a victim of Western imperialism. It is a theocratic authoritarian regime that survives by exporting violence, funding Islamists, and crushing its own people. And yes, it funds Hamas, it funds Hezbollah, it funds all the little proxies around the region and around the world with Iranian people's money, not the government money, not the regime money, stolen money taken from the worker who cannot afford bread in Iran right now. Families crushed by inflation, taken from women who are beaten, jailed, tortured, raped for refusing religious obedience. And this is why leftists are silent. Because Hamas fits their narrative, but Iranian people don't. Because Islamist violence against Israelis can be reframed as a resistance. But Islamist violence against Iranian exposes the truth. Right now, as you're watching this, Iran, a country of more than 92 million people, is being erased in real time. Near total blackout for more than 24 hours. No internet, no call services, no connectivity whatsoever. And yet silence. No emergency protests on Western campuses, no hashtags, no solidarity statements, no megaphones, no tears. Because Iranian suffering does not fit their agenda. Because leftist movements today are not driven by human rights. They are driven by selective outrage and ideological loyalty. They will scream about censorship unless it's done by an Islamist regime. They will condemn the state violence unless it's wrapped in religious language. They will chant Free Palestine, but they will never say Free Iran, because that will require admitting something unforgivable. That political Islam is not liberation, it is domination. And that is exactly what's been happening in the West, by the way. That the Islamic Republic is not anti-imperialist, it is imperial toward its own people. That Hamas is not some isolated resistance group. It is part of a broader Islamist ecosystem that is funded, trained, and sustained by the regimes like Islamic Republic in Iran. And here's the part that they do not want to hear. You cannot claim moral superiority while excusing a regime that kills and murders women for refusing hijab, executes protesters, cuts off the whole nation of 92 million people from the internet, and uses foreign proxies as a distraction from its internal collapse. You cannot pretend to care about Palestinians while ignoring Iranians being shot, tortured, and murdered by the Islamic Republic in Iran. That is not solidarity. That is ideological blindness. Iranian people are not silent. They are being silenced. And the silence from the Western left, well, that's a choice. A choice to protect an ideology, a choice to excuse Islamism, a choice to look away when millions of people are suffering. Because their suffering, Iranian people's suffering, complicates a slogan. History will remember this moment. It will remember who spoke for universal freedom and who decided that some lives matter less than preserving a narrative. Long live Iran.